But as we have worked our way through the book, we've had to take notice that there is quite a bit of erotic, even sexual, intimate language in the book. There is absolutely no way to avoid it. And I'm not sure that it should be avoided, but I said last week that the subject should be approached as discreetly as we possibly can. I have noticed in the past, I think the last decade, there seems to be a little bit of trend in some charismatic or contemporary churches, you know, the Thrive Church and Rock Church and all things like that. I've noticed that there have been a number of pastors, high-profile pastors, that have taken to preaching subjects on God and sex and romance and all of that. And it seems like that there's a trend to try to be as risque in your title, to try to one-up the guy before you and how risky and how clever and ever so slightly gimmicky that I can be about it. There's a pastor in Houston, Texas. His name is Ed Young. Pastors thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And a few years ago, he preached a series along marriage and marital love and all of this. And so as a gimmick, because you got to have a prop, okay? So as a gimmick, they literally hoisted a bed onto the roof of their church. Huge, huge church in Houston. And he and his wife spent 24 hours in bed on the roof and live streaming and talking and whatever you do, you know, and it's just a gimmick. You say, what do you think about that? I think that's ridiculous, is what I say. I think it's just silly. And I'll be honest with you, I'm glad that God has a book in the Bible about romance and about marriage, even intimacy in marriage. However, I'm glad He doesn't have two books in the Bible on it. I think one is enough. And as much as I want to encourage healthy relationships in marriage, I also want to encourage pure minds and chaste conversations. And to men especially, be pure in your thoughts and in your desires and in your words. You ought never be caught telling or laughing at a dirty joke. There's nothing funny about laughing at something that God has declared is holy and pure. And fornication and immorality and any kind of sexual sin, young men should not be named once among you. And cultivate a healthy, thriving, satisfying marriage relationship, a mature, deep love with your wife and your husband, and be satisfied with the mate that God has given you. Now, in every study that I undertake, I always come to a passage or a text that is very problematic or is very difficult. I usually think when I thought, boy, when I preach through this, that'd make a good book. I could put those in print. And invariably, there'll always be one sermon that doesn't cut the mustard for me, that I would never put my name to. Oftentimes, I'll tell the guys, don't put that online. Incomplete, because it just didn't fly. It didn't go. Like I have got, I don't know how many series of sermons that I think would be good for print, but there's one sermon. I preached some time ago, a few years ago, on the life of Samson. Man, I had 5 sermons on the life of Samson. I thought, boy, this would be great for youth camps and great for teenagers. Sermon number 4 in it is just blah. And it didn't go. And so we just filed it away, and it'll never see the light of day again. Well, I went through the Song of Solomon. I thought, boy, this would be good. I mean, it's a different take. I think it's good advice. I think it's a good interpretation till they came to chapter 7. And today, this is the chapter that will cause us to put this in a folder and hide it away. This is a very difficult chapter. And when I'm done this morning, I will be very unsatisfied with chapter 7. Now, let me just very quickly give you an idea of where we're at. Chapter 1, all the way to chapter 3 and verse 5, there is courtship. She is reminiscing about how they fell in love. Chapter 3 and verse 6 through chapter 5 and verse 1, there is marriage, the fulfillment of love. Then in chapter 5 and verse 2, we saw that first conflict. We saw that first tension through chapter 6, verse 13, really to the end of the chapter, struggling, frustration in love. Every marriage has been that way. I look at some of the young couples that have only been married a year or two, and I think, well, surely, Pete and Bree, surely they've not had a fight yet. But surely they have. Surely they have. I'm sure of it. And then we have tonight chapter 7 and verse 1, and then tomorrow, next week, all the way to the end of the chapter is growing. faithfulness in love. And we followed the story as Solomon has begun to court the Shulamite, eventually married her. We saw the marriage procession at the end of chapter 4 and beginning of chapter 5. We saw the honeymoon night. We saw that first tension, that conflict, and maybe that's just one time. Maybe it's just an example of how they're learning to live with one another. And she feared that she had rejected him and he's disappeared, and so she began looking for him, and it finally ended in a joyful reconciliation. And when you come to chapter 7, I think that what you see is a more settled, deepening, maturing love for one another. The puppy love, the romance, the exhilaration, that stage doesn't always last, but the commitment should. Their marriage has survived the first storm. It seems like that what they went through has drawn them even closer together. It's sad to watch an older couple, after all the kids have left the house, and they discover they don't really know each other. Some time ago, my wife and I were in a restaurant, and I watched an older couple, 50s, 60s, and they had gotten there before we did, and they were still there when we left. And I watched an older couple go through the whole process of looking at the menu, ordering, taking drinks, ordering, getting their food, eating the food, paying the check, and never one time spoke to each other during that entire meal. Both of them were on their phones and playing games or texting or Facebook or whatever it was. And I thought, boy, that is really sad. I certainly don't want to be that way in our marriage as we've been married 27 years. And as we grow, I want the later years to be better than the earlier years. I want love to mature. I want love to deepen. I want love to settle. And I believe that this is what this chapter is about. Greek mythology tells a story of a young man, handsome young man. His name was Narcissus. You've heard of him. And Narcissus was stuck on himself, and there were a lot of young ladies that tried to flirt with him, tried to seduce him, but he was just so self-centered and so stuck on himself that he shunned all of their advances. Maturing, decided that she was going to punish him, break him of this self-love. And so he was out hunting one day, and she prepared a pool of clear water, crystal clear water. He came upon this pool of water, and he looked down into the pool of water, and he saw a reflection of himself. And he was so mesmerized by his own beauty, by his own good looks, that he just kept staring. And he spent the rest of his life gazing at his own reflection. That's Narcissus. It's a ridiculous story, but I think I have met some of his brothers. I think I have met people just like Narcissus. People, for the most part, are eaten up with selfishness. And I would tell you that selfishness, no matter how it demonstrates itself, is a poor ingredient for marriage. Selfish people make very poor marriage partners. The kids have this hand and mouth disease, hand, foot, and mouth disease. And so Jelly Ray and Paisley were over the house, and I didn't know how it manifests itself, but they've got these little red dots all over them. Then they become little blisters and they break, and just red dots and blisters everywhere. And you know, I've seen people that it seems like that narcissism and selfishness, it just oozes out of their pores. And even in our relationships, we're often motivated by self-love, self-desires, more than we are in the interest of others. So a boy is dating a girl, and he tells her he's trying to get her to do things that she doesn't want to do. And he says, if you loved me, you would do this. Hey girls, if a guy ever says that, I guarantee you he's not interested in you, he's interested in himself. He's trying to, he doesn't love her, he wants to use her, and that may be an extreme, but an example of how self-love sometimes gets in the way of us loving someone else. Galatians 5 and verse 13, brethren, you've been called unto liberty, only use not a liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. Now that's a radically different concept than the world knows anything about, because the world says use people. The world says walk over people if you have to. The world says even abuse people for you to get ahead. Other people are in my life to serve me. The Bible shows a different way. True love is about serving one another. The greatest example of that is none other than Jesus Christ. For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. I thought about this week, I thought about how when the Lord came, his life here upon the earth, how that he took care of people's needs, but you never read where they took care of his needs. You read where he wept over them, but you never read where they wept over him. You read where he prayed for them, you never read where they prayed for him. You read where he washed their feet, he served them, but it never did come back in turn. And true love is about serving and giving yourself. You can give without love, but you cannot love without giving. And if you love someone very deeply, that love is going to cost you. And it may cost you more than what you get in return. But if you love that person, it doesn't matter. It doesn't become a source of irritation. It becomes a privilege. I'm not loving you for what I get in return. I'm loving you because I love you. And nowhere is that more needed and more blessed than serving someone and loving someone like that in marriage. Marriage is where that ought to be demonstrated. True love in a marriage is how you serve one another. It is how you live for one another. How your desires are for the other person and not yourself. Someone said that marriage is a 50-50 deal. Put it down as a stupid statement. Marriage is not a 50-50 deal. You have different desires, but you meet halfway. We're going to come together in the middle. You come this far, I'll come this far, and eventually we'll meet in the middle. And maybe I have to give a little bit extra. Maybe I'm at 51% or 52%, but you're going to have to match it. And I give 50 and I see you're 50, but I'm not going to overextend myself. I'm not going to make myself vulnerable. No, if you want me to be kind to you, then you be kind to me. If you want me to be nice, then you be nice to me. That's the world's way. How many of you ladies would be satisfied with 50% of your husband's love? No. How many of you husbands would be satisfied with half of your wife's devotion? No. You don't want your spouse to give 50%, and they don't either. You know, the Bible formula is not 50-50. The Bible formula is 100%. If my wife is never kind to me, I should be kind to her. If my wife never meets my needs, I should meet her needs. If it never comes back to me, I should keep giving of myself, because that's how Christ loves us. And you're quiet because it's a radical thought. And I'm not saying this morning that my relationship with my wife is a one-way street, because it is not. But that is the mind of Christ in a marriage. And you have to run away from this narcissistic, self-centered, self-invested view that says, I will reward you for your good behavior and I will punish you if you displease me. That never works in a Christian marriage. And you say, what does that have to do with Song of Solomon? In order to serve my wife, I have to know her. I have to know what she needs. I have to know what she likes. I have to know what makes her feel secure. My wife is home this morning. She's watching kids, so I hope she's not watching the service. I hope she's just watching kids. There is something that my wife loves to do every year. It is absolutely, utterly ridiculous. It makes no sense. It is extremely expensive. It is not worth a dime. Is to go to Charlotte shopping with her mother every November. It's extremely expensive. Highly outrageous. Buying junk for Christmas. Christmas is where you spend money you don't have to buy things you don't need for people you don't even like. That's pretty much what it is. And every year about this time, I start looking at it. And every year, Brother Eric, here's my thoughts. Not this year. I will put my foot down. This year, I will be the man of my house. I will crawl out from under the bed, and I will say, we're not doing that anymore. And there's only one reason why I do it every year. It means nothing to me. It means everything to her. That's why. That's why I got my little girl a cat when she was little. There's nothing I hate worse than cats. Nothing. I think a man that owns a cat is a sissy. I have no use for a cat. I didn't love the cat, I loved the little girl. See. And I'm telling you, and I'm not setting myself an example, because if I am, and my wife is watching this, she would laugh at that. But I tell you that that's how marriage is supposed to be. Your wife likes certain things. There are certain things that may be important to her that is not to other wives. And the Bible says that we are to dwell with our wives according to knowledge. Why? So I can better serve her, so I can love her in a way that ministers to her needs. In this section, I'm not avoiding the chapter, but in this chapter, there's a beautiful picture of that very thing. In the conversation in this chapter, Solomon shares with her some things that he desires. And she shares with him some things that she desires. And though they have had tension in the marriage, it has not made them bitter against each other. She meets his needs, he meets her needs. There is a maturity, there is a depth to their love and to be there one another. And it is a picture of what I want our marriage to be in our later years. We'll break it down two ways. First of all, I want you to notice what Solomon desires. Look, if you would. Look, here we go. Solomon desires. Two things that Solomon desires. There's more, but there's two in this chapter. First of all, he desires to see. He desires to see. Have you ever noticed that men and women watch TV differently? Yeah. A man cannot watch TV without a remote in his hand. It doesn't work. And the remote is just to flip through channels, I'm not interested in Hallmark. I'm not interested in a storyline. I'm interested in an image. Show me a hot rod car. Show me a lion eating a deer. Show me something. I don't need a plot. I just need an image. A woman's not that way. A woman wants the story. She wants the process. She wants more of that. Because men are visual, women are emotional. And man responds to what he sees. So what Solomon does is he begins to describe his wife's body. He's done that before. He begins to do it again. This time he starts at her feet. He works his way up. Now here's the way to look at this, all right? I heard a guy say this. I said, boy, this really helps me. When you read this description like we have the other two times, I want you to understand that he's not making a visual comparison. He's not saying this is what you look like. He's making a feeling comparison. When I look at you, I have a similar feeling somewhere. He's making a comparison of feelings, all right? Feelings. So here we go, verse number 1. How beautiful are thy feet with shoes, O princess daughter. The joints of thy thighs are like jewels, the works of the hand of a cunning workman. Most commentators say that she's dancing for him. I don't see dancing there. He's mesmerized by the swaying of her body. I don't know. I think this is a very sensual book. We've looked at that, but I don't think that everything in it has to be about eroticism. He says that you're the work of the hands of a cunning workman. You look like a masterpiece of art to me. He says in verse 2, thy navel is like a round goblet which wanteth not liquor. Look right here. Look right here. A lot of commentators say that he's using navel, that he's dealing with something else that is very, very explicit. I have no idea why her navel would be like a round goblet. Now, gentlemen, I'll give you some advice this morning. The second thing that he says to her in verse number 2, don't ever say to your wife. He says, thy belly is like an heap of wheat set about with lilies. I don't recommend you ever use that comparison with your wife. Baby, I tell you, They say that other cultures weren't always obsessed with being thin and slim like we are. I don't know. I don't think he is necessarily saying that she has a huge, huge belly. It's not a visual comparison, okay? It's a feeling comparison. What's he saying? I think when he thinks about the wheat harvest, the abundance, the blessing of God, maybe that's what he's saying here. It's the idea of a blessedness, of abundance. If it's not that, then you figure out what he's saying. But your belly is like a heap of wheat. He says in verse 3, he says, thy two breasts are like young roes that are twins. That's exactly what he said on their wedding night. They've been married for a while. She still has that youthful beauty in his eyes. Verse number 4, thy neck is as a tower of ivory, thine eyes like the fish pools in Heshbon by the gate of Bath-rabbim. Thy nose is as the tower of Lebanon. Boy, that's a big nose. Thy nose is as the tower of Lebanon, which looketh toward Damascus. Again, it's not saying this is what you look like. Boy, you got a big nose on you. That's not what he's saying. You're talking about something that's majestic, it's regal, it's stately, it's like a tower. Heshbon was one of the first cities that was captured by Israel when they came into the promised land. And outside the gates of that city, they said that there were 2 pools of water. And evidently, it was very famous and beautiful. And he's describing her in terms of things that they would know. And the point is not that this is what you look like, but he's making a feeling comparison. He says in verse 5, thine head upon thee is like Carmel, that's a mountain in Israel. The hair of thine head like purple. The king is held in the galleries. You're majestic and beautiful. It's not that she dyed her hair purple, but it's majestic, it's royal. And then in verse 6, how fair and how pleasant art thou, O love, for delights. The point is he is responding to what he sees. He is mesmerized by her beauty. I think that most women don't understand how strongly a man is driven by what he sees. You get an idea of how strong that emotion is when Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5 to a man that if thou look upon a woman to lust after her, thou hast committed adultery with her already in your own heart. Gentlemen, you have to be careful what you see. I'll give you a practical exhortation this morning. A man has to guard his eyes. And your wife should know that you have eyes only for her. I was in Lowe's the other day, and I was standing there at the customer service counter, and there were 2 or 3 men talking there kind of in a group before me, and there was a woman that walked by. And I'll just be honest with you, in Lowe's, you wouldn't expect a woman that beautiful, a woman that to get your attention. And she walked by. And I watched these 2 men just break their neck following her, and you can just imagine their thoughts, and they're eyeing her. And I wondered if they would have done that if their wives would have been there. Huh? Oh, gentlemen, don't ever let your wives do that. Don't ever do it if your wife is not there. You ought to have eyes for just that one woman. And ladies, I think that you should do everything that you can to look beautiful for your husband, because he has a desire to see. There's a second desire that Solomon has, and it is a desire to touch. Now, if there are any verses in Song of Solomon that will make you blush, it is the next verses. Look at verse number 7. This thy stature is like a palm tree, thy breast to clusters of grapes. I said, I will go up to the palm tree, I will take hold of the boughs thereof. Now also thy breast be as clusters of the vine, and the smell of thy nose like apples, and the roof of thy mouth like the best wine from my beloved. And either she picks it up, or he continues, that goeth down sweetly, causing the lips of those that are asleep to sleep to speak. Whatever you think he's thinking about, that's what it's talking about. He wants to touch, feel, hug, embrace, put his arm around her. And it's a touch that can only be fulfilled in marriage. Now, I would tell you that a man desires to see, a man desires to touch. I don't want you to think that's what he thinks about all the time. Somebody said that a man thinks about that every 7 seconds. I think that's ludicrous. And I think that there are men who are so perverted that they see their wife just as an object to fulfill their desires. And we could talk about emotional needs. Man has emotional needs. This is a very physical part of the book. He enjoys his wife. He wants to look at her. He wants to touch her. He wants to sit close, hold hands, be together. He's describing physical needs, and she meets all those needs. Here's the point of the passage. Deepening love, love to meet needs. He's expressing needs that he has, desires that he has, and she fulfills those desires. And it's desires that can be only fulfilled in marriage. And I want you to understand, it's not that a man has these 2 needs. No, the guy, William Harley, wrote the book 5 Needs. His needs, her needs. 5 needs of the woman, 5 needs of the guy. I would tell you there's one of those needs that he mentions about a wife that my wife has, that she doesn't want. It's recreational companionship. He suggests taking your wife out camping. My wife and I went camping one time. It was an absolute disaster is what it was. I think if we ever did it again, it would be a divorce is what it would be. My idea is what my wife's idea of roughing it is a Super 8. It's a Motel 6. That's her idea of roughing it. She's not, now shopping, fine, shopping, but she don't want me there. Anyway. I am so much freer when my wife is not in church. I don't know why that is. It is what Solomon desires. The second part of the chapter is what Shulamite desires. What Shulamite desires? Look at verse number 10. She desires security. Verse number 10, she speaks, I am my beloved's, and this is very important, his desire is toward me. She is expressing the security that she has in knowing that her husband loves her, indicated by that clause, his desire is toward me. She is convinced that she is the only true love of his life. This is the third time that she uses the phrase, I am my beloved's, so it must have been important to her. His commitment to her gives her that security, and a woman wants to know that my husband is committed to me, he wants to be with me, he desires me, he loves me. And listen, a man who threatens his wife has no idea how deeply that hurts her. Or maybe he does. I ought to leave you. That's it. We're getting a divorce. I'll see a lawyer next week. I don't need you. And what you're doing is you are striking at the deepest needs of a woman, and it is cruel. Christ doesn't threaten to leave you. So why would you ever make that threat as well? She desires security. In verse 11, she desires companionship. Look at verse 11. Come, my beloved. Let us go forth into the field, and let us lodge in the villages. Let us get up early in the vineyards. Let us see if the vine flourish, whether the tender grape appear, and the pomegranates bud forth. There will I give thee my loves. The mandrakes give a smell, and at our gates are all manners of pleasant fruits, new and old, which I have laid up for thee, O my beloved. Now, again, there may be intimate talk in those languages, and somebody says that mandrakes is supposed to be an aphrodisiac, and you remember in Genesis the mandrakes that Jacob used for the cattle, and maybe there is, but here's what I think she's saying is that she desires companionship. I just want to be with you. It's springtime again. Let's go to the vineyard. Let's go out to the country. Let's go. Hey, here's the difference between a man and a woman. A man is about the destination. A woman is about the journey. Am I right? My wife and I travel very differently. When I travel, I am traveling to go somewhere. I get in the car, I set the cruise for as fast as I can without getting a ticket. And if we stop for gas, get you a hamburger and use the bathroom, we're not stopping again. We have somewhere to go. It's not my wife. My wife can drive to the lake house, which is a 6-hour drive without a lot of traffic, and she can do that trip in a good 12 hours. Because you got to stop at Priester's, and you got to eat a Cracker Barrel at the Evergreen exit, and then you got to go to the Mall of Georgia, and you got to stop here at wherever outlet store, and it's just and my wife is a good driver, but my wife is a driver. Let me say it that way. Be honest here in the pulpit, because when my wife is driving, she doesn't look at the road; she looks at everything else. Oh, there's a pool. Oh, look at those cows. Oh, she's over here. She's about the journey. She's about the journey. Men are about the destination. And a lot of times that's how it is even in romance, how it is in marital relationships. What these verses sounds like to me, it sounds like she wants to go out into the countryside and enjoy the sights and the smells of the woods. And I don't read it as overtly sexual. I just think she's saying that I want to be together. Let's get away from the city. Let's go into the country and let's be by ourselves. It doesn't have to be an expensive trip. Let's go get a hot fudge sundae at McDonald's and just sit down and talk. That's all we need to do. Just companions, I just want to be with you. You come to chapter 8, boy, it gets really weird. Look at verse number 1. Oh, that thou wert as, what time is it? Oh, that thou wert as my brother, that sucked the breasts of my mother. When I should find thee without, I would kiss thee, yea, I should not be beside. Boy, that sounds awkward, doesn't it? When I was in homiletics class, they used to do drills for preachers, and I've had to do this before. And one of the drills that you had to do is every once in a while they would give you like 5 minutes to preach. You had no time of preparation, no text. You open your Bible, you put your finger down, and you read the verse, and you preach. I read about a young man that did that one time, and he opened his Bible to 1 Chronicles. And he put his finger down, and there's 3 names that you can't pronounce. That's your text. And he preached on how I know there is a God. Because only God can come up with names just like that. Boy, I thought, boy, how would it be if your finger landed on chapter 8 and verse 1? What is he saying? It was not socially acceptable in that day for husband and wife to have public displays of affection. You didn't put your arms around and kiss and hug, and you didn't do that. You could with your siblings, but not with your spouse. And I think she's saying that I wish that I could show my affection towards you in public like I could if you were my brother. I want everyone to know how madly in love I am with you. I want to show my love with no restraints. That's what she's saying. And in verse 2, I would lead thee and bring thee into my mother's house, who would instruct me. I would cause thee to drink of spiced wine of the juice of my pomegranate. His left hand should be under my head, and his right hand should embrace me. There's no other way to read verse 2 as intimate. But she desires an embrace, time together to be with him in every way. Now I'm out of time, thankfully. I'm out of time. And you can read back through Song of Solomon chapter 7, and you can write your own sermon. And I'm being honest with you and telling you, it is by far the most difficult chapter for me. This is the chapter that will cause me to file the sermons away and say that series didn't go like I thought that it would. But I do believe that's what's happening in chapter number 7. And I know that I have more needs and different needs than what William Harley wrote and his needs and her needs, and that's a good book and everything. But here is the point. The point of marriage and your life together is not to be served, but to serve. It is to meet your wife's need, your husband's needs, make sure that those needs are met, and make sure that they are happy. And the point is that the deeper your love grows, the more you will want to serve your spouse. You'll want to make sure that you're meeting their needs, doing the little things that they like. Even if they ignore your desires, you still want to serve them. I want my wife to be happy. I want her to be secured. I want her to be encouraged. I want her to be spiritually refreshed. And our relationship is not about what can I get out of this marriage. It is about what can I give in this marriage, because that is the example of Christ, and anything else is shallow. Anything else is superficial. But I get to be like Christ to her. I get to love her as Christ loved me. I get to give to her like Christ gave to me. And your marriage will deepen. It will mature. It will settle when you learn to love someone like that. So if it is an utterly ridiculous, extremely expensive, totally wasted trip to Charlotte, if that's what it takes to make you happy, then I'll find a way. That's what love's about, isn't it?